our next session is a panel discussion on collaborative research, and Karola is the moderator for this one, so I will just give her the floor now.
Thanks, Jorge. Welcome to our panel discussion on collaborative research. We're looking forward to a lively discussion about how we can work together to break through bottlenecks and advance the state of consensus research. One of the larger goals of Consensus Lab, and I think from this workshop we can say of the extended research ecosystem, is to empower consensus research breakthroughs. And this panel discussion is centered around the question, how can we build a robust and effective decentralized collaboration network for consensus research? What are our first steps? And I'd like to introduce our panel. First, we have Kirsanow of the University of Bern. Christian is professor of computer science at Bern, where he leads the cryptology and data security research group. And he's held visiting positions at MIT and APFL. He's also worked for IBM Research in Zurich. And he has a background in cryptography. He's interested in all aspects of security and distributed systems, and especially cryptographic protocols, consistency, consensus, blockchains, and cloud computing security. We have next Zarko Milosevic of Informal Systems. Zarko is chief scientist and leads research efforts at Informal. He believes that specification and implementation should be in love and strongly encourages techies to garden. Informal Systems is working toward a vision of an open source ecosystem of cooperatively owned and governed distributed organizations running on reliable distributed systems to bring verifiability to distributed systems and organizations. Also joining us is Dawn Song of Oasis Labs. Dawn is the CEO and founder of Oasis Labs and a professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley. Dawn is a researcher and creator of security and privacy technologies, specifically in the areas of software, networking, distributed systems, applied cryptography, blockchain, smart contracts, and machine learning. Oasis Labs is focused on building the next generation of privacy technology for the real world. And finally, we have our very own Jorge Soares of Protocol Labs. Jorge is a research program manager here at Protocol Labs with a background in communications, sensor networks, distributed robotics, and marine technology. In a previous life, Jorge served as a patent examiner with the European Patent Office, where he focused on human-computer interaction and computer construction. He is inordinately fond of ants. At PL Research, he uses his background to create and support plans for discovery and invention over PL's longest time horizons. So now that we know who everybody is, I'll ask our panel to unmute themselves, and I think I will, just to frame discussion, I'll say that during his talk yesterday, Marco raised an interesting question. If you were a systems engineer tasked with building a decentralized computing infrastructure from scratch, how would you start? And I'd like to reframe that as a thought experiment for building a decentralized collaboration network around consensus research. If you were engineering a decentralized computing infrastructure for consensus research, building a collaboration network, what would your first move be? How do you begin to assemble your team? And so I'll open the floor to our panel and maybe seed the question with, what does a decentralized collaboration look like for consensus research?
This is sort of a trivial answer, but I think a good place to start is to organize consensus days. I mean, that is the main conclusion of this effort, right? I mean, our goal with our main goal with organizing this event was really to bootstrap a collaboration network, right? And I think we are. I mean, this is a very promising start, and I think we are on track to meet it. But of course, I mean, it's also just it's a very small part of the puzzle. But bringing the community together, bringing all of the people in this room together is a great place to start.
I actually wanted to say that Zarko here works for a company. It's not even a company. I'm not sure. It's Informal Systems, yeah, and humans tend to organize in sort of companies or like organizations, and Informal Systems is also an organization. And maybe Zarko, you could explain how that works, because it seems to be different from other systems, namely from formal systems.
Yeah, actually, we are sort of on Informal and I would say Cosmos side, trying to to like organize the cross-work teams which can work on the same project. And one of them is Tendermint, the consensus engine. And somehow surprisingly, when we start thinking about growing and bootstrapping team, the technical concerns are not necessarily like the first thing you're thinking about. That's somehow it's a bit surprising, because I guess that would be the first idea. In our current mental model, we are trying to think more about like users we are satisfying, how to essentially incentivize properly the team, and how to essentially be able to grow and scale properly. And then there are also these technical aspects of really how we can be able to have like technical infrastructure in place so we can go from idea to the feature in a much shorter cycle. But like so this is something which kind of I would kind of like to have some chat about, like how you guys are thinking about this. But like from our experience on Cosmos and Tendermint, one of the biggest issue was really like attracting and keeping good people, talents around for long enough, because being in a core team was like amazing opportunity to go through and then like scale, do your own stuff. And unfortunately, the core team were not receiving enough like value in that sense, like that we can really keep people for a long time. And having a high retention rate and having like a lot of fluctuation in the core team, I think is not really in anyone's interest. And so what we are trying to think about is really like, and we had a chat with Mark also on those kind of topics, how we can in general be able to provide really value to core contributors and give them possibility to do the work they are best at, and don't necessarily need to leave or change a lot. And that they're able then doing the work they are best at, be able to have like upside exposure and being able to also like benefit from the success of the, let's say, upstream projects.
But don't you have to steer this in a certain way also? I mean that's what maybe I understand what you're saying is you are steering this developers who came up independently with some things. Now you're organizing them towards the common goal, also through financial incentives in a way. Because that's something what I have seen what we have seen on the network level in a way as well. Before there were any of the coins, there were peer-to-peer systems. Yeah, okay, you can turn it on, you can turn it off. It didn't matter in some way, unless a specific group came together with a goal, and then you would participate in file swapping for the goal. And I think that's for me an element also. Then with the addition of financial incentives, it became useful for me to work in this context, because I have to relate to my other life as well. So that's an answer for me.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying about incentivization. That is a part which was not necessarily present, and so I think that's something we need to change. So like I think that we need to be more aware of like technology we are depending on and people we depend on, and thinking also how we can sort of pay back and not just take the stuff. So that's I don't see, my feeling is that there is not enough of that kind of thinking, and I think that it's in best interest of everyone to have a more of like really taking care about like the people who are delivering value to you. And financial compensation is definitely, and we have tokens now, so we have like tools available so we can make this fun.
Yeah, these are great discussions. I have a couple of points to add to this. I think here we all agree that it's a really important problem and a really a fruitful direction to really explore how we can build systems, decentralized systems in the decentralized way. I think, so there are a couple of things I would like to elaborate on this. So one, I think this is a really fairly green field, even though there has been a lot of course, past history and experience on developing open source projects in general. And so there's a lot of exploration and research and study that's needed to be actually done on this particular topic. So a couple specific things that we are doing that I'm happy to talk about is, so one, so as many of you may have heard, we have been organizing, we have been doing a DeFi MOOC. So essentially it's a free, massive open online course for anyone online can join on decentralized finance. And so far for the class, we have thousands of students over 30 countries globally. And an interesting aspect for the class is, so one is also offered at Berkeley, where students at Berkeley can take for credits. And we have close to like 300 students on Berkeley campus, and then we have thousands of students online concurrently taking the same class. So an important component for the class is essentially, besides doing like quizzes and labs, there's also class projects, which is open-ended with essentially research aspects and components. So for the Berkeley students, then there's a process how the students can form groups. Usually it's about like 3 to 5 students per group, and then they figure out what research topic they want to do, and then they write the project proposal and then milestone and then final report and so on. So for the online students, we actually have been essentially experimenting, trying to figure out what's the best thing to do there, because the online students, unlike Berkeley students, they know each other. The online students, they actually first need to get to know each other and figure out what they want to do. And also there's a question whether the online students can collaborate with the Berkeley students. So I think this is a great opportunity for anyone who is interested to also, join the process. We are actually working out the process as we speak. We help the online students to get to know each other, organize into groups, and we also help propose project ideas for the online students. And to actually, my hope is that if throughout this process, we can have these online students join and then collaborate together, and in the end results in a research paper that will be develop some tools that brings value to the community. That'll be amazing. So I think that's a great experiment for this decentralized research. So that's one aspect, is essentially exploring the domain by actually doing it. And I hope that at the end of the class, we'll have some valuable lessons that we can share, since we are really in the process of doing that as we speak. The other aspect is also at Berkeley, we are starting a new campus-wide initiative focused on decentralized systems called RDI, Responsible Decentralized Intelligence Center. And a part of the center, we have essentially focus on many different questions and research topics on different aspects of decentralized systems. And one of the questions is essentially how we actually build these decentralized systems in a decentralized way. What are the right incentives? And also I think one, it's important, because we want to enable the systems being built in decentralized ways. And also I think even just for the decentralized systems itself, it's important that it reduces essentially the code monoculture, and also reduces the concentration on power of code and so on. So I think Zarko mentioned about incentives. I do think that's a very important aspect. And what are the actual, proper, design space, how to think about these incentives, how are people going to be rewarded for their contribution. For example, one way you can think about is you can count like the components of the code that people contributed. You can count in real world how often that components have been used, so that you can measure. Just like miners getting rewards, you can say that instead of miners just miners getting rewards for running the nodes, maybe every time when the system is being run, like you can look at what component of the system is being used, and whoever contribute to that component will also get some rewards, for example. But then, of course, then there's a question, maybe some contribution are more conceptual, and also right, like this component, maybe someone wrote it first and others changed it later and so on. How do you do the incentives that way? So of course, it's a lot of, there are a lot of open questions. And this is some of the, I think research topics that will be really interesting to explore.
Don, thanks for that really great example of scaling an open decentralized program, the idea of decentralized matchmaking, where students are internally motivated to find each other and to collaborate together on topics of interest. And I'd like to point out, there's a couple of questions from the chat. You mentioned incentives. And there's a lot of interest in what are the appropriate incentive mechanisms for forming collaborations and then for rewarding participants in collaborations and research groups for their efforts. And I'd really like to get the panel's ideas on what those might look like and how they might differ from the incentives that operate in a traditional university environment.
Obviously, that's something that we at PL have also been thinking about. And by the way, to Don's point, one of the projects that we supported or that we're supporting is SourceCred, which is basically, it's a PageRank-like approach to mapping and incentivizing contributions. And this may include code, but also participation in designs or just discussions in a community, right? And I mean, it's very far from a solved problem, but I do think it's going in some good directions. That said, I agree that incentives are important. I would say that we are sometimes overly focused on incentives, if I can put it that way. I mean, bad incentives are terrible, and there are many of those in the current system. Without making an appeal to innate human goodness, I do think that we sometimes overemphasize the importance of incentives in behavior, and obviously, I mean, there's lots of previous work on the open source world, right, including some that we ourselves supported, but the fact is there are people working alone on foundational projects for the internet with basically no incentive, right? And that shouldn't be the case. They should be rewarded for their contributions, but they do exist, right? So people will do this out of their own volition. Is that fair? Probably not. How can we help create a better system that actually not just incentivizes but supports the work that people will do otherwise? And I guess the question that was asked in the chat, I mean, my view would be that grants do definitely help. We do need better ways to give out grants. As it stands, it's still overly bureaucratic, even outside of the traditional system. It's slow, and it also relies a lot on reputation, which is probably not ideal. I think things like bounties will be in our future. But yes, I mean, there's definitely space for doing things in more radical ways. And we were recently discussing, I think it's called VitaDAO, which is a DAO that is focusing on research in the life sciences. And that has a model which is not exactly my favorite. It's heavily reliant on patents and patent revenue. It's fine for pharma. It's not fine for what we're doing here, but there are definitely DAO-like mechanisms or smart contracts that models that could be useful in this context.
Academics are motivated by interesting problems. Yeah, so they're interested by cute things. Yeah, they want to have something that makes them shine also among their peers, like we also are here, but also among those who are not interested in commercial success. So that's because they're interested in building the knowledge further. And so when a project comes with interesting problems, usually coupled with freedom, academic freedom, in some way, because the scientists tend to think that they know for themselves what's most interesting, then scientists are motivated also. At the end of the day, scientists also have to eat breakfast and dinner. That's true.
I agree with Christian here. I think that I would just add that for like the projects, it's also very important that we have like a clear vision and like a clear roles in this, open source decentralized projects. And this also, like, in addition to incentives, which are, in a form of tokens or any sort of like this financial reward or compensation, is important, because like in a team where there are clear responsibilities at a role level and there is a clear vision of the project, it's also easier to contribute. And people could also be like willing to take more, let's say, risk in being involved if there is a clear trajectory or path, like how you can really making the contribution. And we also, like in Informal, we have people who sort of like were attracted and leaving academia to work on a project because I guess they believe that they could sort of apply their knowledge and understanding in kind of real world and solve kind of real problems. So for me, like when we talk about incentives, I think that this sort of vision and the clarity in terms of like organizational structure need to be paired with like these sort of financial gains you're having. And also, as people like working on shiny projects and also, let's say, in general, contributing to the public good, I think that there is no harm in like rewarding them if the project turns out to be like fundamental building block for like, multi-billion-dollar story. So in that case, like, I think these things are not in conflict. So even if you are not like necessarily asking for it, like, I think that we should reward people who contribute or have mechanism to reward people who contributed to like, building blocks, which are very important for the success of the projects.
Yes, I agree very much with what Christine and Zarko mentioned. We all agree that this is an important goal, and really figuring out how to make it work. I think it's a hugely complex problem, right? So one, I think when we talk about incentives, there are many different forms of incentives, and people are motivated by different things. So of course, there is the financial incentives, and there is also the credit incentive, and also ideally, in the ideal world, we hope that everybody is motivated to work together to make the world a better place, to bring greater societal impact, and so on. I think if somehow we can really help achieve that, that'll be amazing, and also really help these different incentives to work together. And also, I think in some sense here we are also dealing with some just traditional or some fundamental like organizational problems, and also even some of the human psychology and so on. So for example, everybody knows about the tragedy of the commons. So oftentimes when you have a decentralized team and trying to work towards the same goal, but then since it's not a centralized top-down structure, then for certain different tasks that needs to be done, everybody thinks that the others should do it. Then in this case, naturally, then maybe things don't get done. And also, just as an example, like people talk about climate change, everybody knows that it's really important. But when each person talking about taking a little sacrifice, changing your own behavior to help the society to achieve the goals, then oftentimes that's, from what we have seen, that's also been difficult, right? So I guess my point is that the problem here is very deep. I think it also brings out actually more issues in how, just in general, how people work together, not just about building decentralized systems. I think the progress that we make here can have big, ramifications and huge impacts in other parts of our society as well. So I think it's a great topic to work on and really explore how we can do better. And that's why I said I think it fundamentally actually get to how to relate to human nature and how we can actually better organize as a human race together and achieve some of these bigger goals together as decentralized and as individuals and so on. So it's a very exciting topic.
Thank you, both here and in the chat. I'm sorry, I spoke over George again. Please.
No, that's not a problem. I was just gonna agree with Don, right? I mean, my point was never that we should not reward people. People should be rewarded for what they do, right? My problem is that in many cases, or my point is that in many cases, this may actually exacerbate the tragedy of the commons, right? I mean, in the well-known case in open source is OpenSSL, right? Which was extremely foundational and was being funded by no one. And sometimes the incentives are such that it makes more sense to create a shiny new thing than it makes to actually work on those foundational services that are broadly useful to the community, right? And so it is important to find out how to route some of the financial outcomes to that foundational work rather than just to the latest shiny blockchain or cryptocurrency or whatever.
Speaking of shiny attractors, here and in the chat, there's been some attention to the idea of having attractive problems, really interesting goals that attracts people to work on these problems. And I'm wondering, I'd like to ask the panel, is it necessary to have a single goal state or a vision of the future that we're all coalescing toward? Or can we accommodate multiple goals? And how do you, as George said, how do you route people toward the appropriate goal rather than toward some shiny attractor that may not be the highest and best use of their time in a decentralized fashion?
It was just like in Cosmos, we are sort of quite decentralized. So there is no like single organization. Informal is one of them. And so there are, even like within single organization, there are sort of challenges between teams when you need to work together. And so like when you are opening this further, like it doesn't get simpler. And so what we are trying to sort of manage this by recently using something called workflow model, which is I think initially proposed by Galois, so the company from verification space. And so their idea is to have like clear roles and clear responsibilities. And essentially, even in this decentralized space, I think we need to have like clarity, like who is leading the effort. So it's not like, although we are decentralized, we are not all equal in terms of like, responsibilities. And so I think that we need to have some structure in place where people can naturally, organically take some of these roles, and then also be able to establish this workflow relationship with like other leads from other projects. And so I think that we, on the topic level, we need this kind of clarity or alignment between like different, let's say, groups or orgs if you want to do something together. Because we have like, I was having a lot of these experiences recently. We have a call with some other, company or the, ecosystem representatives, and we are super aligned. We want to work together. We share the values, but then everyone is like super busy with their own stuff, and like, and nothing really happened there. I think if there is no really clear joint goal and people who will essentially lead the effort, and then try to, take care about like resourcing it, finding people who can work on it, and taking care of this, it seems it's not really happening. So that's sort of my experience. So I think that it's very hard to have this organic valley. So I think that someone need to take care about this at the end. And although being decentralized is kind of cool and, having contributor, I think at the end of the day, we need someone who is sort of responsible and orchestrating the efforts.
I wanted to take your question into another dimension, namely, you seem to suggest that there could be some central idea planning or some central things around, like if there's a marketplace for ideas first, yeah. But in our field, an idea is, or a formalization of a problem is usually half of the solution, yeah. So if somebody can clearly articulate the problem they wanted to solve, then they have already nailed it down, that they have actually built something, yeah. And so in that sense, this wouldn't work so well because it would be difficult in the first place just to articulate these research problems like this in a very clear way that is definitely that would be measurable if it comes to a solution. And it would also look a bit like in the times when people are running for gold through the countryside, if somebody puts out a map and it says where he or she suspected the next gold mines to be found. Yeah. So that is for me a bit difficult to say how to do this planning centrally. I think what we can say, what I can say at this time is sharing a vision, sharing a common vision. That's the most important thing. That we're going to go to make it more clear in technical steps, but we know we have to break it down into technical steps, but that's the difficult part because already that is work.
I think I agree with Christian said. I think also when you look at problems and ideas, that there are many different types, right? So for example, in math, I think this has worked really well, right? Like the last Fermat theorem and these examples, you can write really succinct statements that even like 6-year-olds can understand. But it takes mathematicians, decades or even centuries to try to figure out how to solve. So in math, there are many examples of clearly specified problems, long-standing problems, where then the community try to work on over a long period of time and try to make progress and so on. So that's in math, and I think maybe in physics there has been similar, theories and hypotheses and problems and so on. So like if theoreticians propose some hypothesis and the different experimentalists, they would then go on try to design different experiments to prove or disprove certain theories and so on. So I think when it comes to maybe computer science and systems, given the complexity and the diverse nature of the problems, like Christine said, sometimes, right, even clearly identifying and specifying the problem itself is already a big contribution. And although there, I'm hopeful that with a decentralized process, potentially that we could one day have that essentially done in a decentralized process too. I mean, even just I think in thinking about our own process, oftentimes for a paper we have like a few co-authors, and in general it's a small group of people, bouncing ideas off of each other and continue to refine. And the problem usually takes a period of time for the idea to germinate and then to and get crystallized and so on. And in general, I think so far typically how it works is that you have a small group of people that already know each other really well, so you can bounce ideas off of each other in a very efficient way and so on. But I'm hopeful that with the technology, actually this could be done at a greater scale. So for example, like with COVID, I think like many of us in the past, we've had in-person discussions with our collaborators, but now we often just do it online. And like oftentimes with my student collaborators, we have Google Docs and so on, we write down things and we make comments, and then it seems to be actually fairly effective with the technology. So I'm actually very hopeful that even this kind of process that we can scale to the bigger scale with more decentralized participation. I'm thinking like this kind of process, if we just make, for example, the Google Doc or whatever open to the public, the others can, if they're interested, they can contribute, they can comment, they can revise things and so on. That could be an interesting process. And that's also some process that we plan to experiment, explore in like the DeFi MOOC class that I mentioned, and also in some other like decentralized collaboration setting that I mentioned. So yes, I think I'm hopeful that with technology, a lot of these things can get much easier and make it easier for us to collaborate in a decentralized fashion.
I think technology obviously helps a lot, right? But there's still like a human aspect to this thing that did not change that much over time, right? I mean, I was listening to Christian, and I was being reminded of something that is also a frequent discussion for me, which is the international technology roadmap for semiconductors. So the semiconductor industry roadmap, right? And this happened, I mean, this was first created in the 90s, I guess, and it was a 15-year outlook into the future of the industry, right? And the goal was clear. The goal was there are a lot of pieces in this puzzle. As a foundry, you depend on a lot of manufacturers of different parts, right? And so all of these people need to be aligned. If you're moving to a 10 nanometer process at one point, you need all the equipment from the different phases and the different suppliers to be there at that same time, right? And so the industry came together and every few years published an updated 15-year roadmap for where things would be. And this was a consensus exercise by the industry, right? Now, obviously, there is a big difference here. The semiconductor industry is extremely compact. It's you know, a few large players at the actual semiconductor stage and a few upstream suppliers. So it's much easier to do this exercise. But then again, they were doing it without the aid of all the technology that we have today. So I do wonder whether this is something that we would ever see happen as a broad consensus in the blockchain or the distributed system space more generally.
One who asked there, how do we facilitate building strong relationships over the internet? I think like Juan, like you were saying, by extending a network like a graph, yeah, by one-to-one relations, and then growing it like this, not by a star topology, because the center of the star would be overloaded, and it can also not be by complete graph where everybody talks to everybody, because that's not scalable. That doesn't work. So it has to be going with a hierarchy, but also by personal trust in some way. That's a prerequisite for, I would say, for trustful and effective collaboration.
I guess it's related also to this university activities, and I fully also agree there. So we are, I would say in general, quite under-resourced. So we are like definitely lacking a lot of people able to lead various efforts. And so I think that this is something where it shouldn't be so hard to collaborate across like various projects and ecosystem, how we can be able to attract more people, and how we can able to sort of be able to onboard them, educate them, so they can then be part of some projects and be able to contribute. So it's really like it's in my view one of the really like the biggest problem we're facing. And then also the blockchain sometimes has like the negative connotation, which like for me, coming from like distributed systems, it's kind of a bit hard to understand, because it was but like a lot of people they really don't see a value in blockchain. And I think that the whole maybe cryptocurrency and that side, the speculative side of thing, is just like discouraging people to be part of this. Although we are working really on like core infrastructure projects in most of those, I guess at least people here, and but it's just a big challenge, which I was sort of like not taking so seriously, but it seems to be also something we need to take care about. And so educated people and being able to spread more word about like what exactly problems we are solving, and being able like to contribute. I think we need like more stronger like kind of some kind of internships or like co-mentorship and collaboration project also between maybe teams, and also with the universities also, so that we can grow new leaders basically.
We've discussed potential decentralized governance structures, incentive mechanisms for building collaborations. How do we build trust in a decentralized fashion? How do we organize knowledge work? So I think we have a lot of interesting things to think about as we work on building the consensus research collaborations of the future. And I'd like to thank all the participants of the panel for a very interesting discussion, a very stimulating discussion, and I'd encourage everybody to check the Slack and to continue to participate in the Slack thread around the discussion, maybe form some decentralized collaborations asynchronously via Slack. And thanks again for attending the symposium.
All right, thank you, Carla, and thanks to all of our panelists.